Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we are here with Dr. Lindsay Tedds from the University of Calgary, and she had some things to say about the budget, in particular, two things: capital gains and the disability benefit. And these are both getting a lot of attention, and so I wanted to talk to the person who knows the most about these things, Lindsay.
Well, I mean, according to all the investor bro dudes on Twitter, I know nothing, but uh, there you go. As a non-innovator, they call me.
Yes, yes.
So with capital gains, look, the increase in the inclusion rate, which is not the tax rate, it's
Yes.
how much, what percentage of gains do you include in income that will then be taxed at your marginal tax rate. That is what's changing. And I mean, at least the last 15 years, the tax academic community
Hmm.
has been writing a lot of pieces that talk about how the inclusion rate needed to change because of a variety of different factors. But I think the one that's coming out right now, I shouldn't say coming out right now, but which is at the top of this explainer,
Hmm.
is we needed to make sure that we were taxing capital gains at the same rate as dividends and at the same rate as wage income,
Okay.
because the differential in those tax rates means that people were engaging in tax arbitrage.
Right.
Instead of pursuing the method of remuneration that was best for the situation, they were instead tax motivated to focus on capital gains as opposed to dividends or wage income. And this particularly impacts people with CCPCs who have the ability to focus on each of those three ways to remunerate
And
themselves.
CCPCs, just for everyone, is the personal corporations?
Yeah, the Canada controlled private corporations.
Okay.
Sometimes it's always hard to get all of the acronyms right, but
Yes.
CCPCs, yeah.
Right. Okay. And so that, yeah, so they've been focusing on the capital gains as a result. And is this, I'm guessing this is the whole thing with the doctors right now, kind of saying they've been told to focus on these because the provinces didn't want to pay them higher fees.
Yeah, the province. Yeah. And so, sorry, this is me having a moment. This was the exact dialogue we had in, what was that, 2015, 2016, 2017, when we were changing, when there was a proposal to change not only how you can remunerate family members who are shareholders or workers in a CCPC, but
Yeah.
also the passive income stream that you can keep in a CCPC. We know from that dialogue that the provinces, for a long time now, this is not new,
Yeah.
have been telling doctors that, hey, we're not going to increase your pay, but here's this tax loophole, this entity that you can use to pay yourselves when we won't. And so, but again, this is not new to now.
Yes.
That we've had these discussions many times over, and a CCPC is not meant to be a tax shelter.
Yeah.
It is supposed to be a corporation, predominantly for liability reasons, to use as to whether or not you're going to be self-employed or CCPCs or what have you. And there I would like to point out there are doctors who have not incorporated, right? It's not all
Yeah.
doctors, and some professors have incorporated. So anyway, we do have doctors that are not incorporated, and therefore they cannot take advantage of what is a tax loophole. You need to pay people appropriately. You don't use tax shelters to remunerate people.
Yeah. And it's something I've been kind of saying on Twitter in the last few days too, is like this should be an invitation to have a conversation around that, but it hasn't been
And it should have been
thus far.
like back in 2017, and it wasn't. Like, we've got to get a grip. Doctors need to be appropriately remunerated, particularly, if I may be so bold, female doctors who are in specialties that are underpaid under the pay scheme. But we seem to all focus on, those doctors that whose fee schedule is not similarly impacted.
Right. All right. And so I guess it just because there's been so much pushback from all of the tech bros and the CEO classes around this capital gains. I guess I just wanted to get a couple other thoughts around that because I like one of the things I keep hearing is about, oh, this is going to impact innovation, but they weren't investing in productivity or anything at the lower rate. So it's hard to say that this is going to have a material impact if it goes higher.
Yeah, it's one of these things. Like, and again, I look forward to the hate emails that I get from this class who think I don't know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
So my husband is a software developer. He has had businesses. He's currently an employee, as I've pointed out on Twitter, because of the impacts of COVID. I've lived a life
Yeah.
with an innovator. And these bros will try to tell me, outside of disclosing that innovation and small businesses and all of this kind of stuff is a family affair. Okay, if it's a family affair, then I do indeed have lived experience in this area.
Yeah.
And I also, have a peer group, as a result of that, of people starting their own businesses, all of this kind of stuff, making these decisions. At no time in the startup, in grassroots startups of businesses and innovation,
Yeah.
it is not at the cap. The only person who brings up the capital gains inclusion rate would be your lawyer or your tax accountant. And if that is a fundamental driver of innovation, then we've got bigger problems.
Yeah.
Because there is no way that including a somewhat larger portion of capital gains above a $250,000 threshold should be impacting your decision to pursue an idea that is going to be successful.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, I appreciate that is controversial, but I also note a lot of the emails I get are actually from tax accountants, not from actual business people. So again, it's what is the fundamental driver? Is it tax advice towards exploiting tax loopholes, or is it the fundamental decision of whether or not to pursue an idea?
Yeah.
I've made my point clear, I think. Sorry,
Um,
Dale.
yeah, all right. And so I think I think this is a discussion that is probably going to be fairly circular for the next few weeks.
It is going to be circular. And, I think you've seen these op-eds being written by people who
Yeah.
have bought secondary properties and are now all freaking out. Well, I mean, I'm sorry. If you bought a secondary property and it's increased that much in capital gains, such that you would pay a higher inclusion rate, well, kudos to you. Um,
Yeah.
now, I will also say I do fundamentally argue and believe that capital gains from a principal residence should also be included in taxable income. So I just want to make that clear.
Which the government is not touching with a barge pole.
And you know what? Pre-budget, when I raised this idea that I think they're going to include the capital gains inclusion rate, only because when I'm looking at the numbers, it was a big enough a thing for them to
Yeah.
do to plug the hole. So it's not like I know anything specific, but I can't remember what I was saying. Dale.
Yeah, sorry. The secondary residences, principal residences.
Oh, yes. So,
Yeah.
if I'm going to say that people who have bought secondary properties and being subject to a higher capital gains inclusion rate above a $250,000 threshold, I also want to ensure that people understand. I do also think that capital gains above a threshold on a principal residence should also be taxable
Yeah.
income. And that is true in the United States, just as everybody tells me we have to be competitive in the United States. Capital gains on principal residence above a certain threshold are included in taxable income.
Okay, that is good to know. And speaking of plugging the hole, we were going to shift gears and talk about the disability benefit because I know this has been a real bugaboo of yours. We both saw the minister in charge of this absolutely immolate her credibility on CBC the other day. um,
Yeah, that was quite
to
the
use
appearance.
a fairly polite term.
Yeah.
Um, and and just I guess in terms of I'm kind of a bit of a loss as to why the government thought this was acceptable, other than they gave themselves a deadline and had no hope of meeting it, and just threw this out the door in order to try and placate people. But
Yeah, or tax policy at finance drove this because we had heard,
mhm,
and again, this is not anything that's like, that I know for sure, but working with a lot of disability communities, we heard for several years that tax policy at finance was involved and was looking at a annual layout of 1 to 1.5 billion, and that's what we got.
yeah,
And that you know um, it's just, I'm so frustrated with this. It's going to take me a little bit to sort of formulate the words here, because they strung the disability community along for several years on the hope, and if I may, if you look at the legislation, on a commitment
yeah,
to do much better than that. And I think this is something that we don't talk enough about, of governments exploiting the nonprofit community as well as individuals who really just don't. I mean, people with disabilities have to use a lot of time to manage their disability and their symptoms.
yeah,
And then to engage in what was essentially 3 years of not listening and not respecting and not incorporating any of the things that they said is, I don't even know what the word is. It's way more than a slap in the face. It's like,
oh, I think it's a
it's
betrayal.
it's a total betrayal, and just rude and um, disrespectful, and all of these kinds of things. Of, you were the one who made the commitment. You, government,
Yeah,
Liberal Party, in your plat, you made the commitment, and then to have it end like this. um, you didn't need the community and all their time and all their expertise to land here.
yeah,
I hope I'm expressing my rage enough.
I'm getting it.
And
Um, yeah,
I know the minister is saying that, this is the start and we can build off of this, and the provinces should have been doing things all along. Yes. And in fact, I just had some tweets at Sheila Malcolmson in BC, because they have a 540 page report that they paid almost $4 million for, to tell them what they can be doing on the provincial disability
yeah,
benefit. But again, it was the Liberal Party in an election platform that made the commitment for the Canada Disability Benefit, that
yeah,
had none of the words associated with it that the minister used in that appearance on PNP.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And let's point out, I live in a province that is most likely to claw back that $200
Yeah.
benefit
Right.
that they are providing. And this feels like CERB all over again. If you remember when CERB was first rolled out, the government, the federal government, all they did was say, hey, provinces, please don't claw this back. And only 3 didn't, right?
Yeah.
Every other province and territory clawed back income assistance when their beneficiaries qualified for CERB. And they qualified because the provinces have incentives for people on income assistance to work.
Yes.
And so it's not like, again, there were provinces, including my own, that balanced the budget on the backs of people with disabilities. And I just can't, I don't know how to tell people how repugnant I find that. It's just so veiled in ableism
Yeah.
to a degree that I just can't put it into words.
Yeah. And fully understandable. I guess just to round things off, I guess what kind of numbers were you looking at in terms of what this should have been in terms of, not the 6 billion over 6 years, but what a more reasonable expectation for what was promised to have been?
Yeah, I mean, again, if I may throw the PBO under the bus again.
Please do.
So the PBO has access to data that the disability community does not have access to.
Yeah.
So those of us in the grassroots that was trying to do some modeling, we're kludging together bits of information and instinct and understanding and things like that. And, given what I knew about the data that was available and the fiscal position of the government, because I'm an economist. Whether I like it or not, the budget constraint always sort of comes in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form. So while the best case would have been in that 30 billion range, I was on the side of 10 to 12 billion of being realistic, 30 billion being reasonable, 10 to 12 being realistic.
Is this per year or over?
Yeah, per year.
Okay.
Per year. Yeah, not over.
Okay. Just needed to make that clear.
Yes, my apologies. And that was based on a broader definition of disability than the DTC. It was based on assessing eligibility on individual income, not household income. A disability benefit should never be based on household income.
Yeah.
And also factoring in how it would interact with provincial programs. So you can think of 30 billion of something that would supplant all provincial programs, whereas a 10 to 12 would be something designed to provide a floor across, and then disability assistance in each of the provinces and territories making up that difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and it's good just to get that context out there so that we know kind of what the disparity between what was promised and what was delivered.
There's a big disparity. What is it? 1.4 billion a year.
Yeah.
Versus 12 billion a year versus 30 billion a year. I mean, we're not even in the same stratosphere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for taking the time to talk us through these things. I know they're very much in the discourse right now, and it's good to get some actual facts and figures around that.
Well, and I dare you to find somebody else that can talk about both capital gains and a disability benefit in one interview.
So thanks so much for doing this, and we'll talk again in the future.
Thanks, Dale. Appreciate it.
All right. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale_no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.